school and one more rural high school. And during this unit, they read Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, and then they discussed the book, generally also themes surrounding the book, in a whole semester-long kind of forum, 40 questions in total. So in order to gather data, I looked specifically at that forum in detail, the questions posed, the way the students and teachers participated, and then I also interviewed three kind of main players in that experience. Jane, who's a grad student in the Participatory Assessment Network. She worked extensively with Beth, who's the high school teacher at the alternative school, and then also Grace, who's the high school teacher at the rural public school. So through those interviews, I was able to kind of have some emerging themes come up. They helped clarify what I thought I saw on the forum and answer some questions. And so in order to make sense of all of that data, I made use of computer-mediated discourse analysis from Herring and also participation analysis from Zhu. He describes it as one of the elements of content analysis in which the contribution and engagement of teachers and students is examined, or the changing roles of teachers and students. So that was helpful. Okay, so some emerging themes that I'm just going to kind of run through and kind of point out what I found most interesting. I just kind of categorized them, and I cut out a lot of things and kind of reordered it for today. But there were sort of pre-discussion roles that came up in the interviews, specifically during discussion roles that came up both in the interviews and through looking at the forum discourse itself, and then after discussion roles, which came up kind of more in the interviews. And so those were sort of the ways I kind of made sense of all the interesting things I found. So maybe one of the most important first steps in engaging in this kind of environment is having a purpose, not just doing it to do it, but having a specific reason. Grace describes it as sort of being a way to replace using a journal in class. She said she learned that students would never participate in classroom discussion. And she found that allowing students to use a journal to write in before discussion enabled more voices to speak. This seemed to work very well. And then skipping to the end, I used the online discussion forum to replace the journals. I think this was a natural progression. So for her, the focus was just having meaningful discussion and discussing the novel in a way that was kind of interesting and that got people talking. Jane went a little further, discussing objectives for her, and again, she was the grad student that worked with another teacher, and so she and this other teacher kind of brainstormed about this. But she felt like it was a little bit more than just having good discussion about the book. She felt like there were more skills kind of being enhanced. And it was sort of this idea of having this collaboration with students that they didn't even know, that they'd never met. To her, that was a really important component of the assignment. She said that's something that's really important for kids as they move out, as we prepare them for life, not just college and not just workplace. Just so we have this phenomenon of invisible audiences, and trying to picture this audience and write for this audience is a really important and high-level skill. So that was one teacher move that kind of changed the way that she approached this whole thing. Beth discussed collaboration and interaction as the main goal, getting the students to talk to each other, A. And then B, she actually did have some concepts, some core content knowledge things that she wanted her students to get. So when she discussed imagery in the novel in a discussion question, she really wanted them to get those concepts via the social interaction on this medium. And so that was her main goal. Another role that was really important and that really is dependent on the identity of the teacher, specifically their relationship with technology, is choosing a platform. And for various reasons, Beth chose Ning as opposed to Moodle. Probably one of the most sticky issues that I'd like to return to is determining assessment. And that seems to be something that was really, people had very strong opinions about when I talked to them about this. Grace had a classroom full of students that were honor students. And she ended up deciding to give them a grade for their quality and their participation and the amount of participation. And she wrestled with that a lot. But she said she found out that there really isn't one right answer. You have to understand your students and work to find a solution that benefits each student the most. Beth, on the other hand, when I asked her about this, she said, well, of course I don't grade them on this. I just tell them to respond, and they do it because that's my expectation. It was kind of an irrelevant question, which I found really, really interesting. She says she encourages everyone to do it. I won't force anyone. Students are invited, and most accept the invitation. But it's not a problem. Most students like to respond on me. And Jane mentioned the problem with assessment is that it's often easy to kind of grade on one type of assessment. That is, you like to initiate conversations or answer questions quickly. She said that something important about the participatory assessment standpoint is that you want to provide multiple evidence for participation. As far as establishing appropriate use norms, there was actually sort of a spelled out like rule guide for them on the NING when they first initiated and looked at it, but Beth didn't feel great about it. So this was something that was kind of given to her that she had to use. She said really students should develop their own sets of rules and norms. And they also did not discuss what the proper formed discourse would be. How should we address these questions? What kind of language should we use? As you can see, Mike, who comes from Grace's class, has really school academic-like language. Capital letters, full sentences, right? Kelly, on the other hand, has a little something, something, if you know what I mean, and LOL. And so there's a really large difference, and this posed some problems. Jane noticed that when her students started working with Grace, they got intimidated because, Beth didn't really care about grammar and punctuation, and Grace's students were a little bit more schoolish. They approached it more school way. As far as during discussion, the first kind of step the teacher took was framing discussion questions, and you can see the wide majority they were sort of regular, traditional sort of questions about literature, character analysis, personal opinions, those types of things. And so those kind of take up these two pieces of the pie. And then here we've got student-driven space where they came up with their own questions and led the discussion. Here we have sort of activating prior knowledge, and then just a few questions had to do with sort of their personal reflection on their learning experience. So framing discussion questions, the idea was to kind of keep them open and not known. And there was the big question about instructor presence. How much should I be involved? Me being there, does that kind of make people pull back? And so that was another thing I want to kind of explore more in terms of future research. Very interesting. I'm running out of time, so this is what I'm really going to kind of speed by. But you can see that one type of teacher comment during discussion was posing a new question. This was by far the majority. Most of the time when a teacher entered the forum, she asked a question or he asked a question. And these are all different categories of ways or reasons they asked questions, which we won't go into. There was also a lot of validation. There was also some personal expanding on the student contribution, directing and steering of questions, correcting students' misconceptions, answering these questions like a student. Most forum posts actually had multiple purposes, of course. And then kind of the last thing was the monitoring student participation was another large role that teachers played during discussion. And again, we don't have time to go into these, but some undesired forms of student participation teachers said they didn't like was when there was just mere question answering, repetition, and unacknowledged idea rephrasing. When there was just parallel play, kind of random answers. When there was just pure validation with no extra additional comment. When there was affirmation followed with paraphrase or expansion, though, they felt a lot better. To them, that was like, okay, they're engaging with past comments, and there's something going on there. When there was arguing, to them, that was also a great sign that there was some real intellectual engagement going on that was authentic. When someone noted a change in understanding, again, a great thing. Even off-topic talk was welcomed as long as the kids kind of used that and then went back into the work. One student often took on the teacherly role, particularly just one. All right, so just to end here, some of the recommendations that the teachers had as far as sort of the after phase, what do you do after discussion? Beth felt really strongly that this should be ran in a hybrid classroom as a three-pronged cycle. She said, I'll introduce a topic or question in a kind of regular discussion, so the kids are thinking about that. Then we'll use the NING, which is the discussion forum, and then we'll talk about it afterwards, and then kids will actually talk at that point. So for her, the third part was also very important. She also emphasized having a reflection as a personal reflection about what the students learned or engaged with in the forum is really essential. And Grace also mentioned the link to classroom discussion. So I think that as I examined the data, and my interest primarily really was in teacher identity and teacher roles, I found that, of course, as teacher roles and teacher identities are renegotiated in the online space, so are students. Starman mentioned that when introducing new communication technology in schools, educators need to take into account that even though students and teachers might be familiar with a new mode of communication, the established and conventionalized genre of communicating with that mode might not be considered appropriate in the classroom, and new discursive ground rules may need to be reestablished within that particular classroom context. And I think that applies to new sort of identity constructs and new kind of role constructs. And I think I'm pretty much out of time, so any questions?